Hi, Coach Hallis here, and I want to talk a little about upcycling. So last year I vlogged my seniors going through this project that I designed for the first time called the Canon Collage Project, and that's what's on the screen right here. Is last year's final product where my students came up with top 10 or top 5 lists in all these different categories, from films, literature, songs, all these different areas that they thought students should experience before graduating high school, challenging the established canon for what it is that kids have to do before they graduate. And I enjoyed the project. The kids enjoyed the project. Their artwork was displayed at a local business, and the website is still up today, and it's right here today, so you can still go through. The project has this QR code on it where people can go and they can look at the individual art that kids did. So they came up with their lists, which you can see on their individual websites by clicking on these, and then they made these collages of all these different things. They chose which things to incorporate, from images to quotes to different symbols and things like that. They learned how to use some software, and they came up with these different things. So this year I wanted to go back to that project. It was a really good thing for seniors to do the last 6 weeks of their senior year, but I wanted to improve what I noticed last year, when, in a combination of what I saw and student reflections. It's really important to make sure you include time for student reflections after a project is over, where they can look back and somewhere in there give students the opportunity to give you feedback as to what could have made it better. And between the student feedback and my own reflections, I determined that I gave them just too much breadth in that assignment. So way too much breadth, and students were largely just trying to fill out their lists. They were just trying to get the bare minimum, and it wasn't necessarily due to a lack of student effort or passion or whatever, but they just didn't have the time or capacity to do research at the depth that I wanted them to do. So this year I was able to restructure the project accordingly. So instead of having every student do everything, I narrowed that list down, or we came up with 9 different categories, and I had the students decide amongst themselves who is going to do which categories, and that one category is the only thing that you're going to do. And I allowed up to 2 people to do one, but they still had to come up with their own lists. And so this year's version, the final collage, the collection of their collages is beside me, but for example, these 2 students worked on songs, but then so they have individual lists that you can click on and see here, but then they came up with a combined collage. And this one was pretty simple. They came up with, a few to represent the songs on his list and a few to represent the songs on her list, and so forth. Same thing here. And then there were some situations like the student who ended up doing literature is the one who wasn't there on the first day, and nobody else wanted to do that one. But yeah, so this was a key change. There were other things that I really wanted to make sure that I kept in. For example, at the end of the project, this was like almost an afterthought. It was like right before I decided to launch the project last year. I decided that at the end of the year, I was going to have each individual student meet with a professional adult who isn't me, who got to see like basically the soft launch of their web page. This is almost ready to be published for the rest of the world. A professional adult got to see that and then prepare some interview questions for them. And then they went and without me being able to prepare them, without me knowing exactly what they would ask, they went in and they talked to an adult who might ask something like, okay, you said this was a book that everybody should read before they graduate from high school. Who was your favorite character from that book? Or what was your favorite scene from that book? Or what, something that would really push them to go deeper than just give a synopsis and say something like, oh, it's good because it has good characters. But having a conversation with somebody who could dig deeper with them. And that was super valuable, not only in and of itself, but to inform them as they were going through, hey, you can't just Google a list. It needs to be something that you've actually experienced. You've actually done some research on these things yourself. So keeping that was important, but giving kids the opportunity to focus more on one area allowed them to do the level of research that I was hoping to get from them, where not only the research of, if I'm going to say this is something that belongs on my list, I'm going to have some better reasons for you, but the research to determine their list in the first place. I wanted them talking to other adults. I wanted them talking to people who weren't from the same place that they're from and maybe didn't look like them, and people who were from different generations than they are. I wanted them to have a very diverse set of input and then go research what that was. So they brainstormed things all together. We shared a document where they could suggest things to each other and then they could add things in there. So instead of every kid this time just barely filling out a top 5 or a top 10 list, as like when they were done, like, oh, I got to find more things to put in my top 10 list, we had more what I was hoping for, which was they had lists of, like, the lowest brainstorm list was like 25 items, and then they had to narrow that down from there. They had to go research those things and narrow it down from there. And part of the reason I didn't think of that in the first place was when I did the project myself, as you should always do, to come up with an exemplar and to realize pitfalls and things like that. Jeff Robbins has a whole, like, lecture set up for you about why you should do the project yourself, and he's right. But there was a flaw in that I'm 35 years old now, and for me, I have read a lot more books, and I've seen a lot more films, and I've heard a lot more songs, and I'm way more out of my personal bubble at my age than they are at 17 or 18. Okay, so sometimes you can't catch everything from doing the project yourself. And what allows you to catch some things, fortunately, is having the students do the project and going through the course of the project. So all of this leads to, I use this as an example of the possibility of upcycling, and that is, really taking reflection seriously. And if the project went well last year, it's not like it was a disaster. It just could have been better. And even if a project is a disaster, it doesn't necessarily mean that idea is flawed and can't work. It might just mean that 1 or 2 tweaks to that project could make it something really special. So we have to be open-minded to all kinds of things. I've heard people say, I tried project-based learning or deeper learning and it didn't work, and therefore that's the problem. Like, you tried this thing one time and it didn't work, but it's an entire teaching philosophy, or it's an entire methodology behind project design or unit design or lesson work. And the first time that you teach anything, the first time you do almost anything, you're not going to be particularly good at it. So if you're lucky enough to design a project from scratch and it goes really well, great. But we should always be looking to upcycle that. If we're going to do that same project again, if it was really special and it was a really great experience for students, and you don't want to reinvent the wheel, you should be looking for ways to make it even better than it was last time. And beyond your own reflection, you can get that from student feedback. So this was an example where I made that relatively small change, but it provided a lot more depth for those students. And I'm about to take this over to the public library. And this time, I think the final product, comparing this piece to last year's piece, I mean, these collages by nature are very muddled. You have all kinds of stuff in every single one of them, whereas this year's collage makes a lot more sense. You can look at those things and instantly identify them, but coming together, it's less sloppy because you see it as a more cohesive unit. You can look at those individual pieces and see, oh yeah, that's historical figures, and oh, this is video games, and I can see what those students are trying to represent. And then again, they can someone can scan that QR code and go to the website, and they can read into their more specific explanations. So always look for opportunities to upcycle if you are going to reuse a project you've done before, or if you had a project that wasn't particularly successful, but you think it might have potential. I hope this helps.